I found with a lot of musicians is they're so good at playing, once they start playing, they're fine. They have trouble with the introduction of announcing their name, where they're from, who their teacher is, what they're working on. And that's where they stumble. And the other catch is for for the teacher that might be considering them as a student, this is really the only glimpse they may get into this person's personality, what they're like, whether they want to work with this person for 4 years. So to me, that needs to be rehearsed just like the Bach or the Beethoven. A lot of people just gloss over this.
I love today's podcast guest. He actually appeared for the first time on a podcast on this podcast a few years ago. I'm Jason Neath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are chatting today for the third time with Dr. Don Greene, the performance coach, author of multiple books. We're going to talk about one today, but he's done so many great things in the world of music and in teaching people to level up their game. Today, the topic is college prep for musicians, which we did bring up a couple months ago on the podcast along with John Grillo, but today we're diving deep into that topic and about this book, which is a step-by-step guide that outlines precisely how to apply for, prepare for, and win auditions at top music schools. Certainly an important topic, and that's what Don and I dig into. Great chat, about a half hour long, and I know you're going to get a lot out of this. I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, Steve Swan String Bass, Upton Bass, The Bass Violin Shop, and A440 Violin Shop. More on them later, but let's dig into this conversation all about college prep for musicians, music students, parents, everybody associated with Dr. Don Greene.
Hey, Jason.
How's it going?
Good. How about you?
Good. I feel like we just did this. Actually, we did just do this. It was like January or something. So,
yeah.
So college prep, and you and John Grillo and I, we talked about it a little bit when we were chatting in January, but it was more about like the TED video about myelination and all that. So, yeah. And actually this is great because I have a whole lot of bass parents that listen to this, or music parent, but lots of people email me and they say, I don't play bass, but my son does, or my daughter does, and they're 15 and they're thinking about music, but they don't know what to do. So thank you for this book. And maybe we could start with like, and this is pretty open-ended, but like, what should those parents be thinking about? Like they've got a student who's a junior in high school, for example, and they're thinking about music school. What are some of the considerations that they should have?
Well, especially if they're non-musical parents, the consideration should be that they need to do their homework and learn about this puzzle of getting their child into a music school, because it's not the standard thing. And I'm not a musician. I didn't grow up through that system, so I don't understand it. But fortunately, Annie Bosler and Kathleen Tesar do understand it intimately from inside. But to me, it's a maze, and that to me is why this book is so important, because it's tough to figure out.
It's absolutely tough to figure out. And something you brought up in that podcast with Adam is, I think you used to do golf workshops. Am I remembering this right? Golf workshops with parents and students. And I think Adam or you, or maybe both of you, brought up like with that path is just so much clearer. We turn on ESPN and we see college sports all the time. We don't see, I think Adam made the point, we don't see Colburn's orchestra, playing against Juilliard's orchestra, which is a great image, and who plays more in tune? Well, we go with that. So yeah, it is a mysterious world, isn't it?
Well, yeah, there's an association called the American Junior Golf Association for young golfers, junior golfers. And they had published a book for college expectant high school kids, how to get a college scholarship for golf and exactly what to do. And it's basically the same system for music, but it's so different because it is music. And it's not in the limelight, and people don't understand it. People generally understand what's involved in a college scholarship for sports. Contact a coach, send them your scores, if you're running your times, all that. And that's the process, and people understand it. But for most musical parents, and scholarships are different for musicians than they are for athletes, and it's not so mainstream and it's not so visible, like you're saying. So it's, for a lot of parents, it's amazing, misunderstood or not understood at all. And that to me is why the two other authors give such helpful information that's so necessary if the kid does want to get into a good music school.
And I've been advising my own private students, and I used to be a public school orchestra teacher, so I've advised them, and I used to teach at DePaul University, so I've talked to people in that capacity, and I feel like I'm still trying to figure out what the heck to tell people to do. You know, I have a couple seniors right now in the midst of this process, this college, you know, and they're finding out they got into a couple of the University of California schools, they didn't get into maybe one they wanted, they got this, and they got a scholarship from this private school, but it's expensive, and you know they're debating these options. It's such a bafflingly complicated process, and then trying to find a good teacher match. Where's a good orchestra program? Where do you want to live? You know what? There's so much to think about.
That's exactly it. There's so many variables that need to be factored in that most people, again, most parents don't understand, and obviously, the other part is the audition, that college athletes don't need to audition, but high school musicians do need to audition, and that involves a whole other set of parameters that need to be factored in: travel, the scheduling of it, the repertoire, different repertoires, different teachers, and yeah.
Well, and then there's where your expertise obviously comes in with all the work you've done over the decades at this point with these different organizations, New World Symphony, Juilliard, other places, your wonderful books that I have on my shelf that we've talked about, you know, multiple times. So thank you for all of that, for sure. But that is such a complicated thing with all the different juggling the repertoire. You know, I tell my students to make an Excel spreadsheet and try to figure out and pick the right pieces. But no matter what they do, there's a period, usually January, February, where they're having to fly to Boston to play, and then they're having to fly back to California to play something totally different, and then head down to Texas to do something different. And yeah, it's no matter what you do, it seems like you're really having to switch gears very quickly in a short period of time.
Well, that's just it. And this is something that most high school students aren't trained to do or accustomed to doing. You know, they're used to playing in hometown, not juggling travel schedules, jet lag, time schedules, getting out of school, this whole maze. And yes, it should be put on a spreadsheet. But again, most high school kids, as far as I know, don't. But again, this is where the book helps lay it out. And Annie in the book has got all these wonderful charts and spreadsheets to help kids factor this in and come up with a plan, an organized plan to work through this puzzle.
It's such a puzzle, and it's been interesting for me being on both sides of that, you know, writing the recommendation letters for the high school students that are going to get sent out, or my own private students, and then listening to several hundred at this point auditions at DePaul University, or I used to teach up in Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin Whitewater, and I remember seeing examples of good audition preparation and not so good audition preparation, and one of my favorite, you'll love it, is this happened several times. Anybody who walked into their audition and started off by apologizing, which happened a lot, that audition never went well.
Surprise. Excuse me for playing for you.
That is, but I was always amazed at how often. I mean, it wasn't the majority, but it would every day of auditions, at least one person would come in. I'm just really tired, or you know, I was kind of not sure what I was going to play, and so but I didn't ask, and you know, like those, you're sending a signal of what you're going to be like to work with, you know, and so and maybe you're going to send those signals anyway because that's who you are as a person, but I think taking some time and thinking through that whole the whole package, the presentation of yourself in the audition. I mean, what do you, and you've worked with people at all sorts of different levels, auditioning for major orchestras, but if we're thinking about this 17-year-old, 18-year-old pool, like what are some things they should be thinking about just in terms of presenting the best possible audition? Wide question, sorry, but.
Well, certainly to prepare for this, to think this through, because it's so critical. And what I found with a lot of musicians is they're so good at playing. Once they start playing, they're fine. they have trouble with the introduction of announcing their name, where they're from, who their teacher is, what they're working on. And that's where they stumble. And the other catch is for for the teacher that might be considering them as a student, this is really the only glimpse they may get into this person's personality, what they're like, and whether they want to work with this person for 4 years. So to me, that needs to be rehearsed just like the Bach or the Beethoven. And a lot of people just gloss over this. And I recommend that they rehearse it, they put it on video, they see how they look, they do it in a mirror to work on this presentation, because to me, this is equally as important as their musical presentation. If they make mistakes in the musical presentation, the teacher will say, well, we can work on that, we can fix that. But if they don't like how the kid comes across, they're not going to want to do a personality change or affect this person in different ways. So this, to me, is a really important part of the audition process that gets glossed over, ignored. Yeah. And it doesn't take much time. It's only a few second introduction, but they need to nail that.
This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Make sure you have the right size string for your bass. String sizes are determined by playing length, the distance from nut to bridge. If your bass has non-standard after lengths before the nut or after the bridge, you may need a different size than you think. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Bass players tend to look for bows in slightly different ways than other string players. Here's A440's Michael Spadero on what he's observed with bassists looking for bows.
Here's one thing I've noticed over the years. Violinists and cellists tend to gravitate toward more expensive bows, and with bass players, I give them as little information as possible, and a lot of times they'll end up selecting a $200 bow that feels great to them and works really well with their instrument.
Learn more about the selection of bows and basses and everything else online at a440violinshop.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Do you need to play a bass beforehand that you purchase? Here's Gary Upton of Upton Bass on that topic.
I hear these kind of truisms stated by retailers like, you have to play the bass that you're going to buy. I think that's the worst thing you can say. Because
great if you live in New York City.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it.
or have 10 grand you can spend on traveling, right? But sometimes you have to trust people, right? And sometimes you have to trust someone's reputation. Sending out those videos, and I can hear it and I can feel it, and I trust this company's not going anywhere, and da-da-da-da-da-da. That's what I tried, right, Eric? I really drilled home. I said, for a long time, like, give them more pictures.
Yeah.
Give them the videos.
Give them everything they need to make a decision.
The reputation of Upton Bass is stellar. People know, like, and trust them through all the great content they've put out online and through time and time again delivering on their promise of quality and consistency no matter what level of bass you're purchasing. Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. And it's amazing how big, even if we just think of the financial stakes. At DePaul, we had this recommendation form. So the three of us were sitting there behind a table, and we had recommend with maximum possible scholarship, or some words like that. Recommend with scholarship, admit, don't admit, right? Or wait list maybe, then don't admit. And what box we checked, that could amount over the 4 years to 120 grand, difference. We're talking about, the buying a house in the Midwest, just like on how they come across in that moment.
Well, that or the unfortunate musician having to find a new career that they're not going to get into music school. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. So much at stake. Mm-hmm. It's an audition. And that, to me, is why, music schools are tougher to get into than normal liberal arts colleges. Juilliard is the toughest school in the world to get into because of this audition component. Mm-hmm. And parents need to recognize this is not like applying for a liberal arts school. They need to check out the teacher, see what the teacher studio is like, whether that's a good match for the student, and whether the student is up to playing to this teacher's level. Mm-hmm. So that's the audition.
that mix of schools, trying to figure out how many schools to audition for, and the whole concept of safety school, maybe we can call it, or a reach school, and something in between. What and there's a lot to unpack in terms of that. But what are some general guidelines that the book covers?
In the book, Annie's got some great guidelines for doing that. She's got some wonderful numbers, like 7, like you need to apply to at least 7, but she's got some permutations with that are just incredible that would outline this out. And this is, to me, a near and dear subject because I made the mistake of applying to too few schools, to 3 schools, thinking I'd get into all 3, and I got rejected by the first 2. And so I went to my 3rd choice of schools, which cost me dearly in terms of wasted time in my life. So this is really important that kids understand the equations of the schools they need to apply for, and some fallback schools that if they don't get into their first top 3 choices, they have alternatives. And Annie lays this out really well in the book and a method to do this. And she's got 100% success rate of kids getting into schools. She's got it nailed. I wish I had it nailed.
I wish I'd had that too, and I wish I'd had that her advice and just the book in general when I was starting out teaching and advising people. I remember real clearly, this is probably 18 years ago at this point, but one of my first really serious private students, he said, "Where should I apply for college?" And I just, off the top of my head, I rattled off 5 or 6 schools, and those were the exact schools he applied to. And I thought, oh my goodness, I just shaped this young man's life like kind of permanently, just frivolously off the top of my head. I was just like, Eastman and Juilliard and blah, 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 blah. And next thing I knew, that was he was listening. And so I started to think a little more carefully about what my recommendations would be for any given student.
Yeah, especially because students really don't have a clue whether they should apply for Oberlin or Juilliard, or maybe not that and look for a 2nd or 3rd tier school. And they just don't have an idea of that. And if they just apply to the top tier schools and they're just not ready, they're going to get 5 rejection notes and have no acceptance. And probably started at junior college.
Well, and something that, regardless of how many schools they apply to, and this is obviously your realm of expertise, they and you pointed this out earlier, they've got to audition, right? That's something that distinguishes music school auditions, and that audition is the doorway into the school, typically. And it's you know, and auditions vary so much too. That's another thing with college auditions. I remember talking to a student who auditioned at Colburn. This is back a while ago, but you know, he walked into the big auditorium or whatever large space that they were using there, and all the faculty were lined up in the back, you know, very sort of probably not set up to be intimidating, but he felt intimidated by that setting. Then you go to someplace else, maybe Northwestern, or at least last time I talked to somebody who auditioned there, and it's much more conversational and it's kind of like a lesson. And then DePaul, we were probably a little more like Colburn or something in between. So the student might not, even if they can ask other people or the faculty, they might not know exactly what they're walking into with those auditions, right?
They're never going to know, regardless of what it is, and it's always going to be stressful. And that's the catch. A lot of high school students, most high school students, this is going to be one of the most stressful events of their life. And yes, they may have done recitals or studio presentation, whatever, but it's not the same as traveling, going to an esteemed school, regardless of how friendly they try to make it. It is going to be stressful. And this is one of the things the book emphasizes. This may be the most stressful event of their life so far, and they need to prepare for it in that way. And one of the things I teach in the book is centering. You know, obviously a strategy for them to learn how to deal with the stress, not just the stress of the audition, but the stress of everything involved, the interview with the teacher, going before other people, you know, talking about themselves, or just the traveling, the jet lag, back-to-back auditions, one on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, different repertoire, different teachers, different setting. That's stressful for anybody, let alone a 17-year-old.
It's so stressful, and it reminds me of like when I was auditioning for professional orchestras. One of my private students, I going through exactly what we're talking about here in San Francisco. He had a bass event Friday night, if I'm remembering this right. Saturday morning, had to hop on a flight and fly to Southern California, do some auditions, came back less than 24 hours later, probably like less than 16 hours later, back, all day event on Sunday. Monday, hopped on a plane to go to the Midwest and do several auditions on a borrowed instrument, then back here. And it's just because he's a bass player, and so just the chaos of that is something that, I mean, even as someone who's done that a lot, I still have to be mentally prepared for it. It's got to be so tough. And then at that age, you're, just the pressure of having, the next 4 years of your life being on the line for that is a tough thing to learn how to manage.
Exactly. And a lot of professionals would struggle with that kind of situation. Mm-hmm. And again, most of these high school kids are not trained for this. This may be the first time of air travel or going cross country. Mm-hmm. So again, this is where the parents get involved to really help the kid plan this out. All the other logistics that they can take care of, because it's stressful enough. And again, with an instrument, traveling with a big instrument or a classical instrument, that's stressful. Mm-hmm. So the parents can really help diminish this somewhat, but the kid really needs to prepare for the incredible stress that they'll be facing maybe for the first time in their lives.
This episode is brought to you by the Bass Violin Shop, which opened in 2001 as a small double bass workshop in Greensboro, North Carolina. Today, they're staffed by 3 full-time, highly skilled bass luthiers, and they specialize in double bass sales, rentals, setup, restoration, and repair. For nearly 20 years, they have satisfied thousands of clients by offering quality instruments, knowledgeable service, reliable repairs, and superior restorations at affordable prices. They offer the most popular brands of strings, pickups, rosins, and covers used by professionals around the world. Choose from brands such as Parastro, Acoustic Image, Tomastic, Rubner, Corelli, Colstein, Fishman, and more. Call or visit the shop in Greensboro to pick up the items in your shopping list. For more information and current inventory, visit their website at bassviolinshop.com and be sure to follow them on Facebook and Instagram. This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass, which is home to the largest collection of double basses on the West Coast between Los Angeles and Canada. That's a lot of miles, folks. Steve's showroom is outstanding. Absolutely worth a visit. It's located just south of San Francisco Airport, SFO, and he has about 70 basses on display. And these basses range from student entry-level instruments all the way to the finest professional instruments. I've sent so many students and referred so many people to Steve's shop. He really does great work. And if you're looking for a bass, you're going to find one that suits your needs, your playing needs, and your budgetary needs for sure. SteveSwanStringBass.com is where you can go. And thank you, Steve, for sponsoring the podcast. I've done a session on, I love that this book is out now because it gives me something to recommend when I do this kind of session, but I've done a session on preparing for college at a bunch of different events and schools and that sort of thing. And I'm always trying to figure out, in a sense, we're preparing for years for this, in terms of learning repertoire or whatever. But when I always struggle with trying to figure out, when does that preparation start in earnest? When do we think, all right, it's college audition season, now we're really, does that happen junior year, or when should that happen? When should someone go buy this book and really dive in? I guess maybe they should buy it right now and keep it on the shelf, but when does that season start, do you think? Or should it?
The way Annie's got it set up in the book is it's from freshman year on.
Yeah.
But certainly the end of junior year, they need to look at their repertoire and the schools they're looking at and start talking to people about the schools. But certainly starting in September senior year, they really need to jump on this as soon as possible. There's so much involved with the resumes, letters of recommendation, different schools, different options. There's so much involved. This needs to be a major priority as far as I'm concerned for seniors starting in September, if not before. And again, this is a mistake I made as a high school senior. I put it off way too late until I had very few options.
I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to listen to all those DePaul auditions. And the other two people on the panel were Chicago Symphony members. One of them is principal bass of the Chicago Symphony, the other in the Chicago Symphony. I was the high school teacher doing all these things. And so I was so grateful to be at that table, feel honored. But I tried to bring what I could. And one thing I did bring was I was the one who was going through all those letters of recommendation. And as they're playing, I'm looking at the student maybe in a different light. And so I would read through their letters of recommendation as they were playing, and I would look at their grades, which I always think is interesting to see, and just kind of try to get a sense of, and the letters of recommendation were always really interesting. I mean, generally they were positive, but I definitely saw some red flags sometimes. Like if I didn't see one from anybody, if there was not a recommendation from their private teacher or from their youth orchestra director or something like that, if it was just their high school counselor, that was always a little strange to me. And that happened more than once. And yeah, that whole, like in terms of the things outside of the actual playing, like letters of recommendation and the like what should people be thinking about?
Well, that's just it. There's so much involved in the package that you want to present to schools. And this is just another part of that package. And again, this is for a lot of high school kids, this is a first time thing. They're going to ask teachers for recommendation, or the band director or the orchestra director. First time they're ever going to ask an adult for a letter of recommendation. They can put this off. They're intimidated. They don't want to do it. And so they ask somebody else to do it. And because of that, and somebody like you on a panel looking at it, say, where are these letters? And they could have a stellar letter from a band leader. They just were late in asking, or the guy was busy and didn't send it, so they don't have it. And that to me is, again, this is a huge package that they need to present to hopefully get in the dream of the school of their dreams, the teacher, their first choice in teacher, and the right financial package for their parents. I mean, that's the equation they need to figure out, and it's complicated. There's so many moving parts to it for a 17-year-old to figure out. That's a tough one on their own, and unfortunately, a lot of really good musicians miss out on the best schools, not because of their music ability, but because of their normal tendencies as a high school kid. Not knowing what to do. Oh, I need letters of recommendation? Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. Let me go ask the band director. I'm sure he'll do one right away. Oops.
And even in that sort of same idea of not really planning ahead, boy, it made such a difference. It has made such a difference. The students who went and visited the school and met the teacher and played, and then you see them again in the audition, and they've worked on what you talked about. I mean, that's the winning combo, right?
That's exactly it. This is, again, where the parents need to get involved, because they've got to pay for this kid to fly to New York to take a lesson with this teacher they never heard of. You don't do that with liberal arts schools, and that's, again, what's so unique about getting into music school. You've got to get the kids to that teacher to see if the teacher likes the kid and the kid likes the teacher, if it's a good match in a lot of different ways: personality, level of playing, expectations, and that needs to happen. And parents say, you mean I've got to send my kid to 5 different schools to talk to 5 different teachers? Well, yeah, you do.
But you get that right match. And if it does hit all those points, like what you're describing with teacher match, school match, and financial package, I mean, think of it as an investment, and you spend $2,500, $3,000 on these trips, maybe, could easily amount to that. But, if we're talking about the difference of it could be like DePaul, that decision, that recommendation with scholarship, without scholarship, whatever. I mean, we're talking, it can easily go well over $100,000. We're talking about different, so think of it as an investment. It's probably the best way to think of it.
Well, that, and imagine a student getting into school having never worked or met the teacher. and it's a bad match, now you have a student looking to transfer to a different school and start the whole process all over again. That's why this is critical.
Yeah, and though that can work, you lose a year sometimes doing something like that. You go through the whole process again. Why not get the process right the first time?
Exactly.
Yeah. That's
what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, it's a valuable resource. And you've got the website to accompany. It's collegeprepformusicians.com, I think, or I'll link to it. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So cool. And that podcast that I was mentioning is actually up on that website, which is very cool with Adam. So I'll link up to that too, because it's fun to hear all three of you. Yeah. And it's always great to talk with you, Don. You're one of my favorite people to chat with, and this is your third time on the show, so you're a regular at this point.
That sounds good to me. I really enjoyed Jason. This all good.
Don, thank you so much for chatting again. And folks, check out that book online, collegeprepformusicians.com. Thank you for what you do, Don, and thank you for listening to the podcast and joining us on almost 600 episodes. Oh my goodness, I can't believe we've gotten that far. If you're new to the podcast, welcome. If you're a long time, thanks so much for sticking with us here, me and now the team. And you can go through our archives at contrabassconversations.com, our website, or download our free app for iOS, Android, and Kindle. That's a great way to dig through and bookmark and download and favorite and all that kind of good stuff. And if you'd like to reach out, feedback at contrabassconversations.com will put you in touch with me, and I love hearing from people who listen to the show. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. And if you're looking for a double bass or some double bass repair work, check out Mitch, mitchmooring.com. He's in the Dallas area, and he's a great guy. He's actually been on the podcast briefly, and he will be on more fully later on this year, talking all about being a young luthier, making basses. Very cool stuff. And thank you also to Krista Copper for going through and cataloging all of these episodes. So helpful. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.